What is going on, guys, and welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name is Bernie. Thank you for joining us today on the Touchdowns to Home Runs show. Hope that your day is going absolutely fantastic. Today we'll be covering the Toronto Raptors, some of the hard truths and tough situations that the Raptors are going to be having to deal with and working around in the upcoming months and even the upcoming season. Today we'll be going over the Goran Dragic situation, what Pascal Siakam's injury means for the Raptors at the beginning part of next year, how Masai Ujiri has done after the Raptors won their championship, and then how far the Raptors' timeline has been pushed back after their disappointing year last year. Just before we do get into the video though, guys, as always, if you do enjoy today's content, please do me a huge favor. Smash that thumbs up button, subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs for more content just like this as we do push for 10,000 subscribers. So let's get right into it. The first topic is the Goran Dragic situation. Now, possibly the biggest move of the Raptors offseason, at least so far, was of course the departure of Kyle Lowry through the sign and trade with the Miami Heat, in which we got a return package of Achiuwa and Goran Dragic. This news, of course, became even more intriguing when Dragic basically came out, said he didn't want to be a Raptor, although he later clarified and apologized for those comments. Now, before I get into the clear downsides of this move, I want to start with why the Raptors and some of the reasons of why they actually might have made this move in the first place. And I think the first and most obvious reason is just out of respect for Kyle Lowry. Now, this was essentially the only way that the Heat could have afforded him. And I think just, again, out of respect for what Lowry's done for the organization over the course of the past decade, bringing them a championship and playing a huge part in that, I think it was a big thing for the Raptors to let Lowry go to his number one, or one of at least his top destinations. Number two is Goran Dragic doesn't necessarily help the Raptors this year, but he is an expiring contract, which means you don't got to re-sign him. You can free up some money for next offseason, when I expect the Raptors to be a bit bigger of spenders. It also allows for a bridge year for Malachi Flynn, allows you to keep him on the bench even if he does play between 15 to 20 minutes, but allows him to, again, develop on that bench. Number three, you could still potentially deal Goran Dragic, most likely at the NBA trade deadline. He's a solid NBA veteran that could definitely help a contending team, which most likely won't be the Raptors. So if he provides some production throughout the course of the earlier part of the year, the first half of the season, hopefully the Raptors could get something decent in return for him. Now, in terms of the downside, holding Dragic takes up a lot of the Raptors' money in the offseason, and even if you do trade him, you most likely need to take some of the contract back, and it still essentially remains the same issue, not allowing the Raptors to have been or continue to spend money throughout this offseason. And then number two, other than using Dragic as a bridge, you have no use for him, and really now you're banking on the development of Malachi Flynn as the point guard of the future, especially if you have any hopes of winning with sort of a timeline that's before the next couple of years. Second topic today, Pascal Siakam's injury, what it means for the Raptors. Now, part of the reason that the offseason was so difficult to navigate for the Raptors front office has to do with that looming injury of Pascal Siakam, which takes him out of the lineup for a large portion of the first half of the season. Now, with this in mind, and we'll get to this even more in depth later on in the video actually, it made it a lot tougher for Masai Ujiri to see a reason to actually go out and add pieces in free agency, because it's really tough to see the Raptors being anywhere near competitive, especially without Siakam. Now, on top of being a star player, and probably the best player that the Raptors have right now, everyone knows the Raptors have a big weakness with their big men, but having a 1A guy like Pascal Siakam at the 4, in my opinion, helps the depth at both the 4 and the 5. The issue now with the Raptors, even if they had added another piece, you're trying to navigate and fill these voids at the 4 and 5 with guys like Khem Birch, Chris Boucher, Achiuwa, Gillespie, and guys like that. I mean, not just quality really at all at the 4 and 5. Good depth pieces. None of them should really be starters on a contending team, especially in an Eastern Conference that is getting a lot deeper. Next up is an interesting one, and I want to talk about Masai and quote-unquote his mess-ups since the championship year. Now, first off, before we get into this topic, I want to put out a disclaimer, say that I think Masai Ujiri, the Raptors front office, some of the smartest people in the entire NBA, and I do trust all the moves that they have made and will continue to make in the future. I also want to say that it cut them some slack given the players that they lost post-championship, and I know that, for example, Kawhi Leonard, in my opinion, was out of the control of the Raptors. They were not able to re-sign him. That being said, though, from my point of view, post the Kawhi era, post-championship era, the Raptors have really lacked a little direction, I think, and have seemed to really lack a real plan in terms of knowing what they wanted to build. The Aaron Baines situation is a perfect example of this. If we're being real, the Raptors have had a center issue not only last year, but for a couple of years now. If you go back to the last year that we had Marc Gasol, he was old, really did zero offensively for the Raptors. And again, the Raptors really knew for a while now that they were going to need a replacement. Another one would be not trading Lowry at the deadline. Again, I think a lot of it had to do with just respect for Kyle Lowry, but at the same time, if we're being honest, the Raptors could have got the exact same package, if not even more, at the deadline, which I think messed up their plan, messed them up a little bit as well. I also sort of addressed this before, but I think a large part has to do with the Siakam injury, but I think the Raptors were ultra passive in the early part of what should have been a very, very important offseason for the Raptors. I understand not wanting to waste money on players who would solely only be able to help the Raptors team this year, but guys like Nerlens Noel, Richaun Holmes got very cheap contracts. Same with the guy like Doug McDermott, who would have been able to help the Raptors in terms of his, knockdown shooting from a wing position. And even after you take on the Goran Dragic contract, these are still guys that the Raptors really should have been able to afford, go out, spend some money, at least bring some new faces so the Raptors can stay a little bit competitive. Because it'll be really interesting if the Raptors are able to stay competitive, and then you get Pascal Siakam back. And I think this Raptors team is still really underrated on paper because you're only waiting for the development of an OG Anunoby, a Pascal Siakam into a legitimate star. And all of a sudden, I think the Raptors are right there. That is a very good transition into our fourth and final topic of the day, which is, how much has the Raptors' timeline in terms of being able to go back into contention? How much has it really been pushed back? Now, I think it goes without saying the absence of Lowry, injury of Siakam, some other issues that the Raptors have on the roster, particularly looking at that number 5 center position, you'd have to assume that the Raptors' timeline has definitely been pushed back somewhat. Now, the Raptors remain in a weird state. They're in between, and I've said this before, in between a rebuilding and retooling phase. But they're doing so in the midst of a very good Eastern Conference that is becoming very deep and very, very good. And I think, honestly, there's 5, 6, maybe even 7 teams that, on paper are one piece away, one solid piece away from being able to jump into Eastern Conference contention. Now, the Raptors are a little bit different from what I would normally call a middle state team, sort of in that gray area where I'd give sort of a title this year to a team like the Portland Trail Blazers. Seem to be locked into a defined ceiling, and other than Dame, don't really have too much, but that's not really the Toronto Raptors. You still got hope with OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, Scottie Barnes, a healthy Pascal Siakam, and if one of those guys can emerge into a star, if 2, 3 guys just take little steps up, I think it would no doubt push forward the timeline of the Raptors. However, as it stands, you're still looking at a very young core, a good core, but a young core that lacks a lot of veteran presence other than really a guy like Goran Dragic. And again, you might still be a few years away. I think that, again, the Raptors aren't going to win this year. I think next offseason will be huge in sort of seeing the timeline. But this year's not necessarily going to be a waste. It's your first year where, again, you're really, really led by your young core with no Lowry sort of being in the lineup. First time you'll see a guy like Fred VanVleet have a bigger leadership role on the team. So I think this is a big telltale year, a lot that the Raptors are going to have to take away. But anyways, if you guys did make it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts and comments on anything that I talked about today down in the comment section below. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs for more content just like this. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you guys again next time.